But I guess to start off, how did you get into music, and then I guess what made you decide you wanted to do film and television?
I got into music through my mum, who is a music teacher.
Uh
And she always said, don't go into music, there's no money in it. But yeah, through her, and I'd studied piano and all that kind of stuff. And
huh.
then I went to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and studied there.
Hmm.
And I just always loved music, and I always loved writing music. Didn't
Hmm.
really know what, didn't know what or why or anything. I just always loved kind of coming up with tunes and songs and stuff like that.
Right.
And then when I was at the Royal Scottish Academy, I started working with some bands in a studio in Glasgow. And then a couple of those bands like Bell and Sebastian and Snow Patrol and those kind of guys did a remix for Snow Patrol.
Hmm.
And then from there, some of the film guys said, God, we love that kind of stuff. That's really cool. Do you want to come and do some film stuff? I was like,
Hmm.
yeah. So just started off doing short films and stuff. And then do the short films. And then these other bands heard that and said, oh, God, that's cool. Do you want to come and work on our project? So there's always been, it's weird. I mean, again, talking about being the right place at the right time, there's always been that crossover. And it's always just been sort of like for the fun of it.
Hmm.
And then gradually doing more and more of it. And it's weird now, particularly with things like The Social Network and stuff winning the Oscar, there is such a crossover now as far as it's almost become acceptable now. I think The Social Network winning the Academy
Hmm.
Award was the most unbelievable thing, because part of the fact it's a genius score.
All right.
It's become acceptable now to do something different. It doesn't just have to be classical. I know it hasn't always been classical,
Hmm.
but the fact that it's now gone mainstream is it's a huge thing for
Yeah.
composers across the world. And it means that you can go and try out different stuff. And why can't a band write a soundtrack? Why can't a classical composer work with bands? There's absolutely no reason, but it's just previously it hasn't been the done thing. Whereas now it's like, right, well, go for it. Do what the hell you like.
Yeah.
Which is kind of how Limitless came about, really. So
How did you get involved with the project and Neil Berger and all that?
blackmail. Naked photos on the web. No, but basically, I got a phone call. I've finished, been working with this incredible producer called Spike, who's got a studio at the same place as me
Hmm.
in Santa Monica. And he had asked me to do some programming for No Doubt's new album.
Hmm.
So I've been working with all this kind of electronica sounds and 80s stuff. And then I flew back to Glasgow in Scotland, in the UK, for Christmas. Thought, right, time off. I've done 3 soundtracks last year. I've worked with various bands and got off the plane. And literally, as soon as I got off the plane, I got a phone call from this guy in New York saying, what are you up to? I was like, well, literally just got off the plane.
Uh-huh.
And they said, right, we want you to pitch for this film. So I was like, okay, great. What kind of film is it? Is it my style? And they said, we think it's totally up your street. So had various chats and stuff, and then pitched for it. And because they sent me the script, they sent me some visuals. I had a look at it. I was back in the UK. I had for a recording session, and then I was going back to go and see family and stuff. And so I didn't have time to do a full-on pitch, but I had a day and a half of basically, I just wrote some tracks which I thought would be suitable, having seen the subject matter and seen it's about drug taking, seen it's about such and such. I wrote some stuff, and apparently they laid it against 5 scenes, and they said that as far as they were concerned, they could put that out tomorrow, and they were really, really happy with it. And they said,
Wow.
my God, if you can do that in a day and a half,
Yeah.
what the heck, do in 3.5 weeks, which is what I was left with to do the entire soundtrack.
They did 3.5 weeks. Okay.
It was 3.5 weeks, and I got Christmas Day off. They very kindly gave me Christmas Day off, so that was good. But and I think that's the important thing is, if you can show that you can do something and they happen to marry it up to picture and it happens to work brilliantly anyway,
Hmm.
that's your battle for to begin with, because the hardest part of composition is coming up with a tune and a soundscape and a palette
Right.
which the director's happy with, that you're happy with, and which suits the film.
Uh-huh.
Because from there, if you're all singing from the same hymn sheet, it's really easy just to kind of carry on with that. But it's trying to find those initial steps. And fortunately, as I say, I've been working with this band, had all these electronica sounds around. I've been trying for ages to find a project which I could do an electronic score on, because normally I do a lot of film, like a lot of orchestra stuff for films. And so all of a sudden, this was absolutely fantastic. And they were like, yeah, we want this. We want it to be an electronic soundtrack.
Hmm.
You can have an orchestra if you want, but don't make it sound like an orchestra. We want people to come out of the cinema thinking this has been a really fucked up soundtrack.
Uh-huh. Do you think that a traditional or orchestral score would have worked for Limitless, or?
I don't think so. The composer that was on board before, who's a fantastic composer, it just didn't quite work out with him. I think for the simple reason that it was quite, I think he had done quite a classical thing. And that's certainly not a judgment on him. He's a brilliant composer.
Right.
But I think, and for them having been there, they then knew what didn't work. And so what subsequently would work is, okay, well, we know that that's not going to do it, so let's try going down the electronic side.
I mean, for writing, and I guess I can understand. I mean, I'm not even a musician, but when you write for an instrument, you know exactly what sound you're going to get. You know what a violin's going to make. But how do you write for electronic sounds where you're creating, I guess, everything from scratch, and they're all custom, right? I guess sounds and stuff. So, I mean, are you just toying with something and then you say, okay, I know what that sounds like. Now I can write, for that, or do you? I mean, is it a lot of experimentation and?
It's total experimentation, and I mean, a lot of this soundtrack was, the main part going back to it was coming up with that initial theme, and when we spoke about what we wanted to achieve from this theme, it was we wanted a really really simple motif, so it's a little 3-note motif, and then that goes from major to minor to try to show his real twisted side of his head. And when we've got that, we thought, well, okay, that's fine, because then that can be twisted in different ways, whether he's happy on NZT, the drug that he takes, which when you finally see the film, you'll see what I'm talking about. And so similarly, if he's in a bad state, we can have it kind of major minor, it's getting really clashy in his head. And similarly, if he's in a good state, then we can have it crystal clear. And the first time you hear it is when he takes drugs for the first time. And it's in a good way. It's suddenly, my God, this drug is helping me achieve, access the other 80% of my brain. It's a really good thing. And they've bunged the music up so loud in the mix. It's like, this is a crystal clear sound. So it's like, okay. And so that first instinct, that first impression of that tune and that motif was trying to come up with the sounds for that was crystal clear. It was like a bell going off in his head. I wanted something quite bell-like. It's actually a combination of about 4 different sounds from different analog synths and different kind of real vintage kind of gear. And then from there, it's kind of, okay, well, we've got that as a starting point. Let's come up with sounds around it. But the one thing I hate, I mean, computers and synthesizers are absolutely amazing, and what they've enabled us to achieve as composers is phenomenal. But there are so many flipping presets out there, which composers or whoever can just go, right, preset number 1. Oh, that's a nice pad. We'll stick that in there. Just go in. Go into it, just find the initial waveform and start mucking around with it. It's really easy. It just takes a bit of time. And I think people a lot of the time don't have patience. But whilst you've only got, I only had 3.5 weeks for this soundtrack, at the same time, it was essential to come up with something so distinct for this sound going on in his head. So yeah, it literally was, I spent the first, after I got the gig, I spent the first 3 days just locking myself away in the studio and coming up with these sounds, these weird electronic sounds. And mucking around with them, putting them through distortion and vocoders and different effects and stuff, till I came up with stuff that was a palette that I was really happy with.
So, and I guess when you're using a completely electronic soundscape, what do you see what was your music's goal for the character and I guess the energy of the film? I mean, I understand it's dealing with the brain, which is energy and electricity, but I mean, what did you see of your music? What was the purpose of your music in the film?
Well, the purpose was twofold. I mean, it's such a stylized film, and there are so many visual effects on it. It's very, very attention-grabbing when you see it. And the music, we said right from the start, was going to be such an integral part of it because it had to carry the pace of so many scenes. A lot of the time he's tripping, but okay, that's fine, you're looking at the visual effects, but how the hell do you portray what's going on in Eddie's head? And what we tried to achieve with it, me and Neil, the director, was trying to achieve the fact that we're not doing a traditional score. We're not going, okay, here's a chase scene. Let's put on some drums and we're running along. What we're trying to show is that it's very, very disjointed. All the time we're trying to portray what was going on in Eddie's head. So if he's happy on NZT, he's fine. If he's sad on NZT, it's getting trippy and it's getting bad. We're making it really, really twisted and really distorted. And what was fantastic was having that ability to really push the boat out as far as sounds go, because that's what's going on in his head. And I think that's such an interesting way of treating the film. It was one of Neil's ideas. He said, look, I don't want a normal soundtrack. I really just want the entire thing to be picture in Eddie's head. He's got a lot of monologue going on in it, and the dialogue and voiceover going over the film. I want the music to achieve the same thing. I want it to be, he's doing the dialogue, he's got his own music coming out as he goes along. And then we use source music for when there's a club scene or whatever else,
Right.
something that's happening in actuality and the real life stuff.
Okay. So how did you make sure that you didn't, overkill it in terms of, because there's a lot of tracks that are kind of, much more subtle and more, tone, but I guess you said in the mix they really pump it, you know, over the top. But how did you make sure that the sound palette didn't overkill, the listeners? Because what I loved about it is that it still had like a very hyper energy, but I was still able to make out the themes and the melodies, and it still affected me as a listener. But I mean, was there a point where you're like, okay, there's too much here, we need to take some off, or I mean, is there,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there's one scene where Eddie's walking down. He's basically just kind of given over a whole load of cash to someone. He's walking down the street, and it's probably about 2/3 of the way in, and he's absolutely losing the plot completely. And when they actually used it all, I was like, I cannot believe that they've done this, because again, he's just losing it completely. There were other moments where it started off with so many layers, and then gradually strip back and strip back and strip back and strip back. So literally it's this really simple Rhodes tune on the top, and I think maybe a couple of beats and distorted bass. There's probably about 4 tracks in total. And I think that's the interesting thing, is finding out what's overkill or not. And overkill is a very personal thing, and so I'm sure I'll probably get death threats from people going, oh my God, you've ruined the movie. but I think, overkill is a personal thing, and just because one person thinks that the music is really good doesn't mean that someone else likes it. And similarly, one person might think that a scene doesn't need music at all, and another person will think that a scene does need music. And I think that's the conversation that you have between the director and composer, and it's up to you guys to decide. And then, as long as you're confident in that vision, then it's on our heads if it works or not.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Let's see what I got here. So you've also composed for MI5, which is for BBC television. What are the major, I guess, different challenges working on a long running series like that for television versus composing a 2-hour feature film?